Well, between the Luka trade and the Chiefs getting humiliated, I did not have that as a two-team parlay. Um, I was thinking about this. Listen, the Chiefs are going to be fine. They knew they were going to probably draft an offensive tackle in the first round, and there's plenty of them. But it's interesting. Brady's three Super Bowl losses, the point differential was minus 15. He could have literally run the table. Mahomes, it's minus 53 with two Super Bowl losses. He'll be 3-2 in Super Bowls. But I do think I would say this again. Philadelphia, we both said they have the better roster. It's just hard to go against Andy Reid on 2 weeks and Mahomes, who never loses close games. I did not think it would be this, but I do think one of the things I was thinking in the first half is that Brady would always generate something. He was just so good pre-snap, and it was a little. Listen, I know Philadelphia's defense is dynamic, and we didn't think Kansas City would run much on them. But were you a little disappointed that they couldn't generate 6 and 7 yard throws? They couldn't max protect. It was like they weren't moving off their game plan.
Yeah, I thought they were overwhelmed at levels in which you just don't see good teams overwhelmed to the line of scrimmage. Because it wasn't just edge pressures, it was interior pressures. I mean, Mahomes was under siege. They had, I think, 7 yards after the first quarter, Colin. Or, excuse me, 19 yards on 7 plays. That's because they got a first down on the first play from scrimmage, and then they essentially went three and out, three and out. So I just thought the defensive line, remember 2 years ago when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl, they led the league in sacks, and they had an excellent
Yeah.
defensive line. I don't think this defensive line was looked as good as that one because it wasn't productive top to bottom. But the way they played tonight, I mean, that's as well as you can play. And I don't know what you can do when your defensive tackles are doing that, when your defensive
Well,
ends are doing that. I mean, the Chiefs do have a guard playing left tackle.
right. Well, 10 quarterback hits, 6 sacks, 0 blitzes. I mean, think about that. And as I was watching this game with Philadelphia, I kept thinking about this. For years and years, when Peyton Manning was in your division or Brady was, it affected how people in the division
Yeah.
drafted. You watch Philadelphia's D and O lines, and if you're the Rams or the Lions or San Francisco or Dallas, don't you watch this game and think, Jesus, I'm the Rams. I'm like, corner or defensive tackle in the third round. Like it was so dominating that it makes me think all the rivals of the Eagles have to look at this and think, we've got to get better in the lines, or we're not going to compete with this team for
Yeah, I mean
years.
that's to me Howie and Andy has done this too. And the two Super Bowls they've lost, their offensive line has just let them down in those games. I mean the Tampa situation, remember they were missing 2 tackles, and tonight they just got overwhelmed. But it's not just Jalen Carter tonight, right? I mean Brandon Graham does everything to come back off a
Sweat.
torn shoulder or elbow. Sweat was incredible. Milton Williams has that play destroying. He was a third round pick years ago. Like he's about to be a free agent. He's going to get a ton of money. And to me, the offensive line for the Eagles, how about the difference when they would go back and forth? The Chiefs would punt and then the Eagles would come back and you'd be like, well, they're just not generating any pressure. Jalen's sitting back there having a hot dog. He's having some gumbo in the backfield. Just who's open, who's not. I'll just scramble. Where Mahomes, within a second, he's moving around, scrambling left and right. And yeah, I just think the offensive line and defensive line for the Eagles tonight, and really all season down the stretch, once they remember they started slow, like 2-2, and then since then they were the best team in football. And tonight they dominated. They absolutely dominated this game.
Yeah, I mean, before tonight, Kansas City had won the last 9 playoff games where they did not score first, where they
Yeah.
trailed. But in those games, I mean, it was really interesting. Even early in the game, my first take after the first 3 drives for each team is it's one thing if you make mistakes, if you're nervous. I'm like, Jesus, that Philadelphia is not even adding edge pressure. They're just putting their 4 guys out there and they can't block them. As I look at over my notes, only 3 minutes time of possession in the first quarter. I think we forget we've been spoiled, John. We've had, first of all, it was a great season. The quarterback play has never been better. A lot of people that are watching our podcast right now are in their 20s and 30s. This is what Super Bowls looked like in the late 70s and 80s and 1990. I can remember the Giants beating Denver 39-20, and then San Francisco beating Denver 55 to
Yeah.
10. And Denver got beat by Washington 42 to 10, and then the Raiders hammered a couple of teams. You go back to the 80s right now, Google it if you're listening to us and you're watching at home. This is what Super Bowls looked like. I mean, there was a decade. People always talk about the 70s NBA where there were no great teams. The 80s NFL were very few great Super Bowls. So we were on a run. We've had so many good Kansas City Buffalo games or Buffalo Baltimore games. We've just been so lucky in the AFC with Mahomes and Allen and Lamar. But there was a run in college football with Alabama. This is what the title games were looking like. The Bama Notre Dame. This is what Super Bowls look like. So we hadn't had. I thought the Celtics Mavericks was a lopsided mess, but this is one of those where I think it resonates beyond the game. I think you look at Philadelphia, and they're going to have an impact on the draft and free agency. People will feel like in the NFC, you cannot compete with this roster for the next 2 to 3 years if you just don't get better up
Well, I
front.
also think it's pretty rare in football, right? The coaches are such stars, where in basketball and baseball, the executives can be pretty big names. In basketball,
Yeah.
GMs are a really big deal. Listen, I've known Brett Veach for, I don't know, 15 plus years. Brett Veach is a stud, and he's well known. I mean, he should be. He's been to 5 Super Bowls. He won 3 of them. But Howie is kind of the guy that serves the drink with the Eagles. He is much closer to someone in baseball or basketball where he's the boss.
Yeah.
When they needed coordinators, he's going after Vic Fangio. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Sirianni. Clearly, the guys, they beat to his drum. Like, he gets them going from a inspirational standpoint, and he's good with the players, but he doesn't call plays or anything. And he's a younger guy. It's pretty rare to see a CEO head coach in his early 40s. But the talent on that team and the offseason moves. I mean, Colin, they signed a 1 year, $4 million Becton, who was fantastic at guard. They got Zach Bond, immediate All-Pro, and they got Saquon Barkley, who had one of the better seasons in the history of the league. So, I mean, it's remarkable. Howie Roseman became a Hall of Famer tonight. He's won 2 Super Bowls with 2 different coaches and 2 different quarterbacks.
The last 3 Eagle drafts: Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, N'Kobe Dean, Cam Jurgens, Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson, and Milton
Not bad,
Williams.
huh?
I mean,
Jeez.
that is just absolutely freaking insane.
But let's factor in
all of it.
AJ Brown trade. Sign Saquon Barkley. I mean, think about the other things he's done on top of those draft picks.
It makes me think about this. I was watching the other day. I was watching Rick Pitino at St. John's. St. John's was a dead program. Yeah. Rick Pitino takes it over a couple years. You're like, Jesus, are they one of the 7 to 8 best teams in the country? Now, I don't know if they are, but Pitino